The old farmer lived far away from towns and roads where no sound of cars or laughter ever reached. His small wooden house stood alone between dry fields and tall grass that bent with the wind. For 20 years he had not seen a single person walk to his land. No mail came. No traveler passed by. Only the birds in the morning and the coyotes at night kept him company. His hands were rough and his face lined from sun and years of silence. He had once been strong and proud, but time had turned his strength into stillness. He spoke rarely, mostly to himself, and when he did, his voice sounded strange to his own ears, as if forgotten how to speak to people. Each day he woke before dawn. He would light the old stove, drink a cup of black coffee, and walk to check the fences that marked the edge of his land. His boots had the dust of many seasons on them. He still cared for a few goats and chickens that had become his world. When storms came, he would fix broken planks and whisper to the animals like they were old friends. He never thought much about why he stayed there. It was the only life he knew, the only one that didn't demand words or reasons. The world outside, he guessed, had moved on without him. Sometimes at night he looked at the stars and wondered if anyone remembered his name. He had once loved someone long ago, but her face was now a blur in his memory. He told himself he didn't need people anymore. Loneliness had become like an old coat, heavy but familiar. Still, sometimes when the wind carried a soft sound like a woman's voice or laughter, he would pause, his heart beating fast for no reason. Then he would shake his head and return to his chores. One morning the sky turned golden after a night of rain. The field smelled of wet soil. He was cutting fallen branches near the barn when he heard something, a voice clear and soft calling from the path. It startled him so much that he dropped his axe. At first he thought it was the wind, but then the sound came again, closer this time. It was a woman's voice. His heart raced, unused to the sound of another human after so many years. He stepped forward carefully, unsure if his eyes would believe what they saw. A young woman was walking toward him. She looked tired but graceful, her clothes dusty from travel. Her hair shone in the morning light, and her eyes carried both fear and relief. She stopped a few feet away, breathing fast, and when she looked at him, tears filled her eyes. The farmer stood still, afraid to move, afraid that the vision might vanish if he blinked. Then she whispered something that made his whole world tremble. She called him by name, a name he had not heard for decades, and said in a shaking voice, "You are my husband." The farmer's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Husband. It was such a strange word to him now, a word from another life. He shook his head slowly, thinking she must be lost or mistaken, but she stepped closer, smiling softly through her tears, and said it again like a truth she had carried for a long time. "You are my husband." He felt dizzy, his hands shaking. "No," he finally said, his voice rough like sandpaper. "You must be mistaken. I don't know you." She smiled sadly, and something in that smile made his heart twist. She looked at him not with confusion but with deep affection, like someone who had searched for him for years. She told him her name, Amelia. The sound of it struck something deep inside him. He felt a flicker of memory, a shadow of something lost, but it was buried so deep that he could not reach it. He looked at her clothes, at the way she carried herself, and wondered how someone like her had found her way to this forgotten place. She was young, maybe in her 20s, her face full of life. What could she possibly want from an old man like him? Amelia said she had been looking for him for a long time. She spoke slowly, gently, as if afraid he would run away. She said her grandmother used to tell stories about a man who disappeared into the hills, a man who once promised to return. When she saw an old photograph in her grandmother's box, she recognized the face, the same eyes, the same jawline. She thought it was impossible, but something in her heart told her to search. She had followed old maps, asked strangers, and finally found this lonely farm hidden between forgotten roads. The farmer stared at her, still trying to understand. Her words made no sense to him. He asked her why she called him her husband. She smiled faintly and said, "Because my grandmother said her husband disappeared when she was young and you look exactly like him. I thought maybe you were him, or maybe his spirit." The farmer felt a chill move through him. Her grandmother. Could it be possible that this woman's grandmother was the same woman he had once loved and lost? He had left everything behind long ago, walked away from people and promises, unable to face what life had taken from him. Could time have passed so quickly that her granddaughter now stood before him? He didn't know what to say. He turned away, breathing hard. The thought that someone had remembered him, that someone had carried his name through generations, broke something inside him. Amelia stepped closer and touched his arm lightly. It was the first human touch he had felt in 20 years. It was gentle and warm, and he couldn't pull away. She asked if she could stay for a while. The road had been long and she was tired. He hesitated, but then nodded. It had been too long since a voice other than his own filled the air. He led her to the small house where she looked around with wonder at the old furniture, the cracked windows and the faded photographs on the wall. She pointed at one, a young man and woman standing by a wooden fence. "That's you," she said softly. He nodded slowly. The woman in the picture had her same eyes. They sat together in silence for a while. Amelia told him about the world outside, the cities, the lights, the people. He listened like a child hearing bedtime stories. The world he left behind sounded like a dream now. She laughed once softly when he told her he didn't even know what a smartphone was. It was the first time laughter echoed in that house in 20 years. As the sun went down, the farmer sat by the fire, staring at the girl who had come from nowhere and called him her husband. She reminded him of a promise he once made, of a family he had never met, of a life he thought he had lost forever, and for the first time in many years he didn't feel alone. He didn't understand why she had come or what fate had brought her there. But her presence filled the air with something warm and alive. She looked at him like she had known him her whole life, and when he looked back at her, he saw both the past and the future in her eyes. That night, as rain began to fall softly on the roof, the old farmer whispered a name he had not spoken in 20 years. Amelia heard it and smiled gently, as if she had been waiting to hear that name all her life. And though neither of them could explain how or why, both felt that something lost had finally been found. The next morning came with soft sunlight shining through broken windows. The farmer woke up early as always, but something was different. For 20 years, his mornings had been filled only with silence. Now, he could hear another person moving around inside the house. He listened to the quiet sounds of her footsteps and the clinking of dishes. It felt strange, almost like a dream. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, trying to remind himself that she was real and not something his lonely mind had imagined. Amelia had already started boiling water on the stove when he came out. She turned and smiled, her face glowing in the morning light. That simple smile touched something deep inside him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had smiled at him like that. He sat at the small wooden table while she poured hot tea into 2 old cups. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm and peaceful, as if they had known each other for a long time. After breakfast, she asked if she could help him with the farm. At first he said no, saying the work was too hard. But she laughed softly and told him that she had come all this way not to sit idle. So he gave her a pair of old gloves and showed her how to feed the goats and gather eggs from the chickens. She learned quickly, smiling every time he looked surprised at how easily she handled the work. For a man who had lived so long without another soul, watching her move through his small world felt like watching sunlight return after a long winter. As the days passed, Amelia brought new life to the old farm. She cleaned the dusty rooms, opened the windows, and let the fresh air fill the house again. She found an old radio in the corner and managed to make it work. Music played softly in the evenings, and the farmer sat by the fire, listening with his eyes closed. Sometimes he would hum along. Though he hadn't done that in decades, she would laugh quietly, saying his voice sounded kind. He didn't know how to respond to kindness anymore, but her words made him smile without realizing it. One afternoon, Amelia found an old box hidden under the floorboards. Inside were letters and photographs from long ago. She brought them to the farmer carefully. When he opened the box, his hands trembled. There were letters written by a woman named Clara, the woman he had once loved but left behind. Her handwriting was soft and full of love. As he read, tears filled his tired eyes. He hadn't cried in years. Amelia sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. He read the last letter out loud. It was a farewell. Clara had written that she would always wait for him, no matter how long it took. She had written those words before she passed away. Amelia looked down at the letters with tears in her eyes. She told him that Clara was her grandmother. Suddenly everything made sense, the picture, the stories, the reason she had come. She had not come to find a husband, but to find the man her grandmother had loved all her life. She wanted to see if he was real, if he had truly existed. The farmer sat in silence for a long time. The past he had buried had come alive again through this young woman. It was as if time itself had brought her to him, so he could finally find peace. That evening they walked to the hill behind the farm. From there, they could see the whole valley glowing in the light of the setting sun. The farmer told her stories from his youth, how he had built the house with his own hands, how he had planted the first seeds in dry soil, how he had once dreamed of a family before the world became too heavy for him. Amelia listened closely, tears falling quietly down her face. She told him about her grandmother's last days, how she had always believed that he was still alive somewhere. She had never stopped loving him, even after everyone else forgot. Amelia said that before she passed, Clara made her promise to find him, not to judge him, but to tell him that he was forgiven. Those words broke something open inside the farmer. For years he had carried guilt for leaving the woman he loved. Now hearing that she had forgiven him made him feel lighter, like a burden had finally been lifted. He looked at Amelia with gratitude that words could not express. She had crossed miles of dust and time to bring him peace. In that moment he understood that sometimes love stretches beyond life, carried by those who come after. The days that followed were peaceful. Amelia stayed longer than she planned. She helped him fix the fences, plant new seeds, and paint the porch. The farm began to look alive again. Villagers from miles away started hearing about the girl who lived with the old farmer in the hills. Some came by with supplies, curious to see if the stories were true. For the first time in 20 years, laughter returned to that lonely house. The farmer, who once hid from people, now welcomed them with a quiet smile, and every time someone asked about the young woman, he would look at Amelia and say, "She is family." One morning, when the sky was full of pink and gold, Amelia said it was time for her to go back home. Her eyes were red from tears she tried to hide. The farmer stood quietly by the fence, holding his hat in his hands. He didn't want her to go, but he knew she had a life waiting beyond those hills. She told him she would come back soon, that he wasn't alone anymore. She promised to write and to visit when the harvest season came. Before she left, she handed him a small photo of herself and said, "So you remember me when the days get lonely." He smiled faintly, placing the picture near Clara's old letters. She hugged him tightly before stepping away. He stood there for a long time, watching her disappear down the dusty road, the same road no one had walked for 2 decades. He didn't cry, but his heart felt both heavy and full at once. In the weeks that followed, he continued his old routines, but they felt different now. The silence no longer hurt as it used to. Sometimes he would sit on the porch at sunset, looking at the path where she had walked away, and smile. He felt like life had come full circle. Clara's love had found its way back to him through her granddaughter. It was something he never could have imagined. One late afternoon, months later, he heard the same voice again, soft, warm, calling his name from the path. He turned quickly, his heart beating fast. Amelia was there again, smiling, carrying a small basket. She ran to him and said, "I told you I would come back." He laughed, a deep sound that came from his chest, a sound he hadn't made in years. Together they sat on the porch, talking until the stars appeared. As the wind moved through the fields, he looked up and whispered a quiet thank you, to Clara, to the life he had once lost, and to the young woman who brought light back into his world. Amelia rested her head on his shoulder, and for a long time they said nothing. They didn't need words. The silence that once felt empty now felt like peace. The farm, once forgotten, had found life again. The farmer knew that someday he would be gone, but it didn't scare him anymore. He had seen what love could do, how it could travel through years and generations to heal what was broken. And as he sat there beside the girl who called him her husband, he realized she wasn't wrong. In some quiet, mysterious way, they were bound by the same heart that had loved and waited for 20 long years. The stars came out one by one, and the night wrapped around them like an old friend. For the first time in a very long time, the farmer felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be.